Well, hey everyone, happy July 1st. We have made it halfway through 2021. I'm Katie, joined with Chris and John for So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. Kudos to Chris and John for holding it down for the past couple of weeks while I was doing more personal stuff because we are in 2021, which is just a continuation of 2020. So, today on the show, we are talking about, you guys missed me, I know you did.
Well, it's
Talking
amazing
about
we're still on. That's the big thing. We didn't get in some kind of trouble that we couldn't get out of.
Well, because you always just have me in the back of your mind, like, would Katie approve of this? Um, so to get down to business on today's show, we are talking about newsletter marketing and advertising. And so we want to try to figure out how to analyze your email performance, how to attract more subscribers, and make your email list work harder for you. One of the big reasons why we want to talk about this is, Chris, I think this came up last week when we were talking about even more changes with digital advertising, specifically Facebook. And Facebook is making it even more difficult for you to get your ads shown, and prices are also going up in terms of being able to pay for ads. And so, what do you, as a marketer, have control over? How can you reach your audience? So that's why we're talking about newsletters today.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we've heard now from many people, including over in the Analytics for Marketers Slack group, conversations and questions people are having about it. Hey, my Facebook accounts, my ads have been performance has been dropping like a rock, or my Facebook account got canceled by some AI. What should I be doing? So yeah, email is one of those things that is enduring. It's now 50-ish some odd years old. Overall, it is one of the few assets in digital marketing that you actually own and have full control over, and it still performs. It is still one of the biggest performers when it comes to lead generation, to conversion, B2B, B2C, doesn't really matter. It's just a gold mine. So the three things we're going to talk about today: performance data, subscribers, and making your list work harder, are all things that you're going to need some data for. So I'm going to be using the data from my personal mailing list, the Almost Timely newsletter, but obviously use the system and the thing that you have access to. The first place we start, and this is very common, is in just looking at basic performance data. So let's go ahead and go to screen share here. And this is what you're going to get out of pretty much every email marketing system on the planet, right? It's the issue of the newsletter. It's the how many emails did you send, and then how many of them got read. So the first thing we want to do, real simple math here, is just look at the read rate or the open rate. And that's nothing more than taking your reads, dividing them by your sends. And this is, we're looking at now at, we're going back to the last 100 issues of the newsletter. So let's go ahead and add some decimal places here. And to make it easier, I'm going to go ahead and just turn it into a very simple line chart. Now, again, depending on your email software.
Wow, can you make it just a little bit bigger to read?
Yeah, let's do that. And make it gigantic.
Thank you.
So this is the last 100 issues of the newsletter, and what we're looking at is just the read rate. Right in the middle of the chart is around 10%. So you can see that, except for a couple of stinkers here, for the most part, the read rate was hovering around 8 or 9% a couple of years ago, and then is bumped up to around 14-15%, and then is kind of settling in right around the 12 to 13% line. So first things first, I look at this and go, okay, things are holding pretty steady, which is not bad, especially since the number of subscribers to the list has gone up dramatically in that time period. If I move this chart over here and I just do the exact same thing, but with subscribership, again, those sends, you can see those little anomalies. Those are just one-off emails to a very small part of the list. For the most part, the list has been growing pretty steadily. 2.5 years ago, we were just under 50,000 subscribers. Now we're closing in on 250,000 subscribers. So despite growth, the performance has stayed pretty much the same. So when I think about email marketing metrics, there's impressions or opens, there's there's reads, or there's clicks, and then there's conversions, right? If your subscriber numbers are not increasing, you've probably got a marketing problem, right? Or you've got a churn problem, people just leaving your list because they're not getting what they want. If you're getting if your click numbers are down, if you're just not getting people to engage with them, you've probably got a content problem. So there's a couple different ways to interpret these metrics, but this is one of the places most marketers start. This isn't where you should stop, though. Go ahead, Katie.
Well, I was going to say, Chris, just to clarify in terms of subscribers, I think one of the little nuanced pieces that's worth mentioning is you do constant cleaning of your list as well. So you remove emails that are no longer out of date, so they don't count toward the subscriber number. So you're talking your whole list is good emails that are emailable, for lack of a better term, people who will actually receive it. You're not counting bad emails and older, out of date emails. Like, so as part of counting that number, you need to constantly be cleaning your list at least every few months. I know, Chris, you do yours a lot more frequently than that.
Yeah, weekly. And I try not to put crap in to begin with. But yeah, that's absolutely right. So this is your top line performance. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of marketers stop. Like, okay, here's our open rate, our click rate and stuff like that. And this is good because obviously if there's 0 opens, then the rest of email marketing doesn't matter. But the next place that I would encourage you to go is to go into your Google Analytics, right? We're just going to go into your audience here, go into overview, and let's go ahead and create a segment here called email, right? And email is just going to be anything that is from known email sources, for example, like Google Mail, Yahoo Mail, etc. If it's a known publication, if you're doing things right and you have a UTM code for source and medium for your newsletters, that should be in here. And then the medium, matching mail of some kind. So that's the kind of segment I'm after. And I want to see what I'm looking here at is my email driving people to my website, right? I care very much that it's generating traffic for me, because if it's not generating traffic and getting people into down funnel things like buying a copy of my book, for example, then this is just a waste of time, right? So if I can't even get people to go to my website, nothing else matters. As you can see, it's a weekly newsletter. It looks like teeth of a saw every time that newsletter goes out. Something happens. So let's go mush this down into monthly view. And so we can see here for most of the year, things have been going reasonably well, right? You have almost 9,000 visitors. More important, email here, when you look at this little segment here, is 40% of my site's traffic, right? So I can say with reasonable confidence that my email is working pretty well for me.
So what you're saying, Chris, is pro tip: if you're going to send out an email newsletter, make sure it includes a link back to your website.
And it should probably be one of the first links in the newsletter, because you want people to go to where you want them to go. For example, in the Almost Timely newsletter, my header image here goes right back to my website. So if that's the first thing you click on, it's going to send you back to the website. And of course, there's UTM tags and stuff in place for that as well. So we've talked about like the email performance itself. Now we've seen the website performance. Now, there's a third layer of performance that you want to think about with email. I'm going to go over to the attribution model that I built literally just this morning for my website. And this is, let's go ahead and go into presenter view here. This is my channel attribution analysis to see what is driving conversions. Now, for me on my website, there's three things that I mark as conversions. One is subscribing to the newsletter, which is kind of, would be silly for this. 2 is clicking off to buy a book, either from Gumroad or Amazon. Or 3 is clicking on the consulting button, which takes you to the Trust Insights website. Email is about 13% of my conversions, right? It's 40% of my traffic, 13% of my conversions. This is something that's working for me. Where I get alarmed is when I see clients who have email programs and stuff like that, and it's like 1%, 2%. Right? It doesn't cost you a ton of extra money. Well, I guess it could, depending on who your provider is, to send more email if the email is good, if it's worth reading. But in a lot of cases, we see that it's not the case.
Well, and I think that you just hit on a really important point is you can build the number of subscribers. You can look at the open rates, but that still doesn't mean that the email itself, the content, is any good. And so, I mean, that we could probably spend a whole episode on just the content of the email itself and what should be included and how to measure that. But I often find myself disappointed in a lot of email newsletters that I'll sign up for, thinking, oh, this will be good, this will be valuable, I might get something from this. And then it's a waste of an email, quite honestly. And so I've opened it, so it then counts as the open rate, but then I'm disappointed and I don't get anything, so then it doesn't convert.
Exactly. So we actually will talk a little bit about that, about some of the content stuff. The next thing I want to talk about, so we've covered the 3 layers of email performance, like the email performance itself, its traffic driving ability, and its conversion driving ability. And you really want to see those be somewhat close to each other, right? If you get a 80% open rate and you're like a 1% click-through rate, there's a problem, right? Something's not gone well there. But if you're pretty consistent across the board, then your attrition should feel pretty natural. So let's talk about subscribers. I'm going to go here to my subscription page, and there's some basic things that we should be doing to attract more subscribers. Number one is make it obvious where the form is, right? Because if this is a really long page, but I've highlighted it to make it blatantly obvious. There's something for you to do here. You want to know whether your page is doing its job, right? And you can measure in a lot of tools like Gravity Forms, for example, the performance of this page. Is one of the simplest things to do. One of the simplest ways to measure this is, again, let's go back to Google Analytics. I'm going to go to behavior. I'm going to go to content, all pages. I'll type in my newsletter page. I'll click on that page. Now let's remove this segment because I don't want it there. And what I've got here is the page views of my subscription page. I'm going to add in bounce rate. Now, for non-landing pages like blog posts and things like that, bounce rate's not a super helpful number, right? It's just one of those things that's out there. When it comes to your landing pages, it's a really important number because it means that if someone lands on your page and they immediately leave, and the page didn't do its work, right? It's screwed up. So here, my bounce rate is hovering around 50% at the beginning of the year and is now around 65%. So I think I could potentially have a problem on this page if my bounce rate is going up. It means that it's not doing its job of getting people to fill out the form, because I want people to do the thing and move on. So the first thing when it comes to attracting more subscribers is fix your funnel, for lack of a better term. Your funnel is more like a colander. And in this case, 6 out of 10 people who come to the page are just leaving and leaking out. Any effort you put into attracting subscribers is going to be a waste. So there's a couple things that can be wrong with a landing page like this. And we have to go back to Bob Stone's 1968 direct marketing framework: list, offer, creative, right? Are we even getting the right people to the page? If the wrong people are getting here via social channels, whatever, the wrong audience, then of course it doesn't matter. Is the offer good, right? I would argue that it's a reasonably compelling page. We got all the testimonials and stuff here. And is there a creative problem? One of the tools that I love to diagnose stuff like this is a tool called Clarity from Microsoft, from the Bing Webmaster Group. So I'm going to pull up Clarity here. And this is, if you've used Hotjar or Crazy Egg or Lucky Orange or any of the other like randomly food named UI tools, this is no surprise what you see here. You see, what are people tapping on, right? So they go to first name, last name, email, title, company, Twitter handle, how they hear about it, the CAPTCHA, and then subscribe. So things we're looking for would be things like dead clicks, right? Like what happened? Why Why did these things happen here? Why is somebody clicking way the heck out here? What are those things? Are there fields where we lose people, right? Could it be made more obvious which fields are required and which fields are not? And I think, for example, I think I could probably take this from a paragraph box, just a single line of text, and shorten this form up a little bit. So there's some options here for looking at the subscription page itself to fix things up.
Well, and I think that that's one of the pitfalls, Chris, of forms in general, especially as marketers. We want to gather as much information as possible up front so that we don't have to do the heavy lifting, down the line. But I think that that's a mistake. And this is something that I used to run into a lot when I was working in the commercial side of an academic company. They're trying to constantly get all this information, and it was a barrier to entry in terms of filling out the form, because sometimes the forms were literally 3 pages long just to sign up for something. And so that's something that you want to, as a marketer, really critically ask yourself, do I need all of this information right now, or can I get it later as I build the relationship with this person? Do I just want them in the door to find out who I am, learn about me, gain their trust, and then I can start to ask them those more in-depth questions? So really, really critically think about what information you need on the form. Because Chris, to your point, you can see it sort of dwindling down of like, okay, you want my first name, you want my email, okay, but you also want my title, oh, but you also want my company, oh, but you also want my Twitter handle. I just want to read your newsletter. Why do you need all this information? And so that I can see both as a consumer and as a marketer, that's where people are like, I'm not giving you all this information just so I can read about your, waxing poetic about marketing and AI.
Exactly. And the other thing is that I don't really use a whole lot of that information, at least at the individual level. I mean, sort of, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so that is looking at the sort of the creative. When it comes to the list itself, there's a couple of different things that you can do to try and understand, are you going after the right people? Are you even trying to attract the right people? And or is your content matched up with what people are actually interested in? One of my favorite tools in this space is a tool called Clearbit, where you load up your list. And here I put, I did a couple months ago. This 219,000 emails went into this tool. And this part's free. Then there's the part which is definitely not free, where they actually give you the individual information. Have I got the right location, right? So North America is a huge part of this list. Who is my category, right? So my list is 55% B2B, 32% B2C, SaaS companies, consulting, IT, stuff like that. Like, okay, that seems reasonable. Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. Okay, so these are definitely, marketing folks. What industry are people in? Software, other professional services, education, media, and so on and so forth. So already I'm beginning to see, is my content, thinking about this, is my content serving who these people are, right? If my list is 55% B2B and all of my content was B2C, there'd be a pretty big mismatch here. Thankfully, that's not the case. Who are the people? 14% work in marketing, thank goodness, because this was like entertainment or like music, I'd be in a lot of trouble. Who are the seniority levels? Managers, directors, executives, more managers than anything else. So, mid to senior folks, but not all C-suite folks. That again tells me something about who my audience is, who I might want to be targeting because they're sticking around, obviously, and what kind of content I should be creating. And then company size, like how large are the companies who are on the list? 50 to 250 people, 11 to 50 there. 6% was up to 1,000 employees, so on and so forth. And there's a small sliver that's over 50,000 employees. So it's mostly a small to mid-size market list of folks. It's not major enterprise companies. And then 61% list is corporate emails. So this tool, which is still free for the moment, as of the day of recording this, is a good way to analyze broadly who your audience is and whether you've currently got the right audience on your list for what you're trying to sell. If I was doing a music email every week, this would probably be the wrong list to have, right? This is not be a good fit.
Now, I'm curious. So obviously, Chris, you send out your email weekly. Now, John, you also have a newsletter for the Marketing Over Coffee podcast, and I believe that goes out monthly.
Monthly, yeah. It's a shorter cycle and less content. It's really funny. I'd love to hear more about what Chris has to say about how he's out weekly and has dozens of links every week. The Marketing Over Coffee thing is monthly and really only has about 6 or 8 links a month, and so it's a much smaller thing. And if anything, I think frequency helps with numbers, because the Marketing Over Coffee list has been, it has grown from like 2,500 to about 4,000 over the past 5 or 6 years. Like there's been almost flat considering the rate at which the show has grown during the same time. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack in there. And yeah, it's totally random, the way that's been done. I just don't want to do a newsletter every week. That's why that happens on the MOC side. So, and that may be totally wrong.
Well, I think it comes down to what is the purpose of the newsletter. And so obviously Marketing Over Coffee and Chris's personal website serve 2 very different purposes. John, you're trying to grow subscribership to listen to the podcast. And so you're not trying to do the hard sell in the newsletter. You're just trying to say, hey, here's a podcast, go subscribe to it and listen to it so that I can then attract advertisers to the podcast. Whereas I believe, Chris, your newsletter is meant to be get to know me, informational, like here's everything that's going on. And oh, by the way, if you like what you're reading here, here's where you can get more. Here's my book, here's my corporate site, that kind of thing. And so they're 2 very different newsletters. And so I could see where, John, your podcast newsletter doesn't necessarily need to be as frequent, or maybe it does. But those are the types of things that we would want to test for before we make that hard decision to say, this is absolutely the formula for what you're doing.
Exactly. One of the easiest and dumbest things that not enough people do in their newsletters is right here below the unsubscribe, which is share this with a colleague. Like, here's how to subscribe. If you want more people to read this newsletter, give them this URL. I am embarrassed to say it took me 8 years to get around to putting that into my newsletter, right?
Arnold Schwarzenegger has a team of like 12 PR people, and I just emailed them last week. I was like, you should really have a share this newsletter link, because yeah, the last thing you want is forwarding it to somebody and then them unsubscribing you or screwing up your email.
Exactly. So
things I never thought I would hear John Wall say is that he emailed Arnold Schwarzenegger's PR team.
Come on, I got in the chopper.
The twists and turns, man.
So that is probably the greatest single missed opportunity, is A, not having that in there, and B, not making it prominent, right? So the only thing that's more prominent is the unsubscribe button. That is probably the single largest call to action, because I want people to go away. The next thing to look at, so Clearbit gives us a general sense of the audience, but suppose I want to know, for ad targeting purposes, for content marketing purposes and things, a bit more about my audience. One of the things that you can do, and you can either do this by hand, which is laborious and painful, or you can automate it, is to take apart the Twitter bios of the people who follow you on Twitter. I'm going to go ahead and expand this here. And so I pulled all of the words out of 90,000 Twitter bios, the folks who follow me, to see what do they say about themselves? Who are these people, right? Social media, by far the single largest category. Digital marketing, real estate's in there. Marketing agencies, internet marketing, public relations, and things. So this gives me a more detailed idea of who is in my audience. Again, remember, we're talking about list, offer, creative, that direct marketing framework. My Twitter audience is one of the top sources that feeds my newsletter list. So if I'm not aligned in what I say in social media and what I'm doing to promote my newsletter and the content in my newsletter, I'm not going to attract more subscribers. Because if I'm talking like purely about AI all the time and nothing else, and everybody who's in the audience is a social media marketer, it's going to be a mismatch. People are not going to subscribe. They're definitely not going to share it with a friend. Okay. And the third thing to look at is go into whatever your social sharing tool of choice is and look at the content socially that's performing well. Again, you're looking for either content that you can put into your newsletter to begin with, or you're looking for things to advertise with, topics. So again, looking at what sort of the top topics of the last few days are here. We've got our stuff. We've got tagging, CMOs, and so on and so forth. So there's some they're generally aligned with what we saw from the Twitter bios. So this is how you calibrate your list to figure out who should I be going after, who should I be, what content should I be creating, and then even what offers to create. Because again, if I pull back this list of Twitter bios, if I'm promoting content that is about, say, medical marketing, and there aren't medical marketers following me, it's probably not going to do well. On the other hand, if I put, social media tips 101 in my newsletter, it's probably going to do really, really well. There are a number of different agencies in here. In the most recent issue of the newsletter, we just published my session from the Agorapulse Summit on how to prove the value of your agency, how to show your agency's ROI. And it was only out for a week, and it became the top downloaded source for the entire month of June when we ran our attribution reports. Why? Because that's who's on the list, right? There's a bunch of agency folks on there who I would like to know how to stop getting yelled at by my client every month. So we want to make sure our content is aligned. When we're talking about our growing subscribers, right? It's a product. Like, if you're not treating your email list as a product or as a service, I guess technically, and you're not selling it as a service, you're not giving it the resources and time and energy that is entitled to, right? Are you running ads to it? Are you promoting it in social media? Are you going after third parties? One of the things that I do that I speak at some events where it's in lieu of a fee. If the event is big enough, like the Agorapulse Summit, for example, I will simply trade the value for the list. They deliver consistently thousands of new subscribers every single event, right? That's worth a lot to me. That's worth as much as a regular speaking fee. So when you look at how do you promote your list, look at things like public speaking and promotions, doing interesting content that people want. Again, go back to your Twitter bios or whatever. Can you put together a hypothesis about the content people would like based on who they are that you could turn into a white paper or an ebook or something that you can use to drive registrations? It's like every single other B2B marketing tactic out there.
The other really light lift is to let people know that you have a newsletter. So I don't see a lot of brands post on social media, even just once in a while, hey, by the way, did you know that we have a newsletter? Here's the subscribe button. Like, that to me is one of the biggest missed opportunities and perhaps the lightest lift that you can possibly have in terms of promoting the fact that you have a newsletter is, hey, I have a newsletter. So it's not enough just to make it accessible from your website, but you also then have to tell people that you have one and that they can subscribe to it. Now, I want to go back, and I'm going to get a little soapboxy for just a second. So since we're on this page, it's relevant. So we were talking about all of the fields that people use to collect information when subscribing to the newsletter. And, Chip, you had mentioned you often see people asking for lots of information on forms that they never use. I'm going to go ahead and challenge you, not you specifically, Chris, but just companies in general. What happens if you only collect name and email? What happens? The challenge that's being issued is to create a compelling enough newsletter that keeps people coming back, that makes them want to tell you more about who they are, and then they want to get more of your stuff. And so it's an opportunity to build those deeper relationships with your potential customer base. And so let's say we just get a lot of names and email addresses and not a whole lot of other information. The challenge then that's on us is to then do our due diligence to see, are these people coming back? Are they looking at other sections of the website? Can we then reach out to them and start to ask them a couple more questions? Do they engage with other things and download other pieces? And then we can start to see how far down they're moving that journey. And we haven't asked them for a whole lot of information. We just have their name and email address. And as the relationship deepens, you get more of that information around, well, where do you work? What's your title? You know, what are your pain points? What are the things you want help with? But if you immediately lead with that, then it's a turn off to someone because they're like, I don't want to give you all that information up front. And so that's my soapbox is I challenge you to find some restraint and create compelling enough content that you can build that relationship and get that information in a way that somebody is comfortable providing it to you.
You know, one thing with that too is that's a hallmark of better marketing automation systems. You know, I mean, a lot of people go the cheaper route, but some of the more expensive systems will have it set up and you actually tier them and you say, hey, I just want name and email. But if they come from a link through the marketing automation system, it won't even be there. If it's already got your name and email, it won't even show up. And you can say, okay, so if they come back and they've already got these two, then on this next one, let's get the company. On the one after that, let's get the phone number. And so that you create a better experience if you throw more technology at that. But again, you know, you got to be able to afford that kind of stuff. That's not for everybody.
Exactly. So the third and final part is how do you make a list work harder for you? And the big thing that people don't think about is that everything we're trading in is attention, right? When you have somebody open your email, you are able to direct their attention. So go pull up again the newsletter. Let's go ahead and flip to. There you go. When you have somebody's attention, what do you do with it? Right? How do you direct it? How are the places where you're going to try and send it? Obviously, we spend a lot of time in both my newsletter and the Trust Insights newsletter, sending people to other resources and things, right? Content that you didn't read that, you know, if I actually spent some time working on, I would like you to read it. Other downloads. Katie, to your point, if all I have is name and email, but I'm sending people to forums where we can get more information because there's a higher exchange of value, then it makes a lot of sense to trim down your initial subscription and catch them on the back end. If you have a publication, treating this like a real publication, right? Have an ad, have two ads in there, make it clear that it's an ad, but use it as a way to again, direct attention towards the things you need. And if you've got other properties like a YouTube channel or a Twitter account or a podcast or a live stream or a Slack group, put it in the email and explain to people what it is that's in it, what's in it for them. Why would they want to pay attention to these things? Why would they want to do these things? Because you have this attention while this person is reading this email. You choose where that attention goes. And a lot of companies are in a place where their email program is so siloed from their social media program, which is so siloed from their YouTube program, that they never bring all that data back together into one place and say, okay, well, if we have a person's attention on this channel, how can we use it to bolster our other channels? One of the interesting tricks about the way social media algorithms in particular work is that engagement is everything in a very short window of time. If you send an email to a bunch of people and they all click to the same LinkedIn post, that post is going to do much better for a short period of time because the algorithm is going to say, hey, look, suddenly a lot of people are paying attention to this post. Maybe I will show it more often. Same thing is true with a YouTube video, right? Where you can build your YouTube account by directing that attention, but you do have to have a strategy with it. We have some clients where email is kind of used as a band-aid to whatever business line is struggling the most that week, and there isn't a concerted strategy behind that. But when it comes to making your email list work harder, be intentional about what you share, how you share, and how you're directing that attention. Because when 20 or 30 or 40,000 people a week read this email and click through onto things, that can send eyeballs and brains in very specific locations. So we want to make sure that we're using that to the best of our ability.
Chris, John Blue actually had texted me. I sent out on the Marketing Over Coffee text line that we're going to be live, and he sent a question over. He was asking about, in the past, you've done studies on a lot of graphics, very pretty email versus text only, or limited or no graphics. And he was wondering, have you done any more research on that front, and where do you stand now as far as how much images do you use in the layout?
Nowadays, it doesn't matter. In the sense that, it used to be the text-only emails perform better in terms of deliverability and performance. Ever since really since smartphones became the dominant form of communication. It doesn't matter because smartphones have gotten really good at reading and formatting emails, regardless of what kind they are, and showing them well, right? So if your graphics, as long as your graphics aren't screwed up on the phone, like if you have to optimize them for mobile, you can make a newsletter look however you want, and the mail clients out there will reformat it. In one of the things we posted in Analytics for Marketers, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the number one email client on the planet is Apple's mail client. Built it right into the iPhone. It is 55% of the market. So as long as your email looks good in Apple Mail and Outlook, you're in good shape. So from a format perspective, make it look how you want it to look. I recently changed over my email from purely text to a lot of this handwritten stuff, just to give it a distinctive look, just to give it something that is different than you see in every other newsletter. And it's unique. It's something that even if somebody used the idea, it would not look the same because their handwriting is different than mine.
I think the other, it's interesting. We've been talking a lot about the content, but the other piece of it is also the subject line, what makes somebody open it. And again, that's a topic we could talk about for an entire episode. And so we've done our fair share of testing subject lines, seeing what gets more people to open it versus what doesn't, letting people know upfront in the subject line, this is a sales pitch, versus, not saying so blatantly that it's a sales pitch. And so, there's a lot of different factors when thinking about, sending an email newsletter. Calling it a newsletter in the subject line is probably a helpful thing to do. But even before you get to that point, you really need to challenge your team and your company to say, what is the goal of having a newsletter? Is it informational? Is it promotional? Is it this, that, the other? Is it all of the above? If it is, how do we create it so it's not so unwieldy that people never get to the end of it and say, this is too much, I'm overwhelmed, I just need to unsubscribe from this altogether?
When it comes to things like subject lines, one of the things people forget to do is they forget to think about the audience. If your audience is a loyal audience, keep that subject line at least somewhat consistent. Like mine always starts with almost timely or inbox insights, so that this is this thing that you've been expecting. And we try to send it the same time and day of every week, because it never fails. Every time we go out to like an event or something, we ask people, hey, for folks who are over 30, when was Seinfeld on? And always people are like, oh, it's Thursdays at 9 on NBC, right? And like, how do you still know that 20 years later, right? Why do you still know that? Because it was great content at a specific date and time. It was very much appointment media, but it was high enough quality that people remembered it. So if you send out your newsletter and it comes out with in a container they recognize, same date and time, and it's good quality, people will remember it. People will be more likely to open it than if you send it on a random off day, or you send it with an obscure subject line, or who it's from is different. Again, Litmus has done a bunch of this testing, and one of the things that they've noted is that generally speaking, people will open emails from a human being's name more so than from a company or brand name. So keep that in mind as well. So
basically sending your email newsletter from Chris Penn versus marketing at.
Exactly. So when the Trust Insights newsletter comes out, for example, it goes, it's, Christopher Penn, Trust Insights is the person it's from. For almost timely newsletters, Christopher Penn, at CS Penn, my Twitter handle, because again, Twitter is a major source. As opposed to newsletter at ChristopherSPenn.com. Nobody wants to read it. I don't want to read it, something like that.
No replies at acme.com.
Yes. Yeah. No reply is the greatest insult for your audience. It basically says, I don't care what you have to say. And that's another interesting aspect we can cover another time about, what is the customer experience like? But in general, when you're trying to get people to pay attention to you, once you've gotten their attention, keep it in its consistent format so they continue to know that it's you.
So, Chris, we have a question related to what we're just sort of talking about in terms of subject lines and so on and so forth. So Dave asks, why do I not see more research about subject line pre-header text testing? Any thoughts there?
The challenge that a lot of companies run into, when you're looking for like broad research, is that A, everybody's list is different, and B, it's mostly confidential information. You will see that a lot with ESPs, like MailChimp or whatever. They can anonymize and look at stuff broadly to see what works, but it varies so much. For example, if you look at just the Trust Insights newsletter list and my newsletter list, they perform differently in their different audiences. They're not. It's not a 100% overlap. And you would think it would be because we started one from the other, but it's not. And so to do that subject line testing and pre-header test texting is challenging to extract generic results, right? It is absolutely something that you should do yourself, right? It is absolutely something that you should test for yourself, and also do focus groups and stuff with your best subscribers to ask them like, hey, what else could I have in here? That said, and this is my soapbox, I feel like marketers spend too much time on the gimmicks and not enough time putting into content that you actually want to read. Like, I don't care what subject line it is. If your email sucks, and I'm never going to read it again. No matter how cute or provocative the subject line is, because at the end of the day, it's attention. And I have the same 24 hours everyone else does. If you ask me to spend 10 minutes reading your email and it's just garbage, then you go straight to the unsubscribe bin. So a big part of the focus for email marketers should be, are you creating an email that somebody else would want to read? One of the linchpins of both the Trust Insights newsletter and my own newsletter is that I try to have it be stuff that I would want, right? Because, like, for example, in the links that I share, these are things that articles I want to read because I don't necessarily know what's behind them. And if there's a value proposition, like, hey, here's some stuff that you should probably pay attention to, then there's value there. In the Trust Insights newsletter, every week there is fresh data that's you're not going to find anywhere else. It's usually our own data, because I'm curious, like, what is Instagram doing for brands these days? The reason why marketers don't do that is because they don't put enough time and resources into email marketing, right? It's one of those things. It's like a checklist item. Like, okay, send out the email. Okay, move on to the next task. No, one of the things I love Ann Handley says about newsletters is that we spend more time on the news part and not enough time on the letter part of communicating to another human being. Hey, here's some stuff I made for you, right? And marketers go into the email marketing with that mindset of, here's some stuff I'm going to sell to you, instead of, here's some things I want to give to you of value that, hopefully you will return at some point. And we don't spend enough time and effort on these things.
I would also say, if you don't know what your audience wants to see, what your customers want to see in a newsletter, ask them. One of the things that we did probably around this time last year, so once a quarter, we send out a 1-question survey. We try to keep it to 1 question. Just sort of like a quick pulse check. And we ask people, what would make you want to share a newsletter with, a colleague, or, get them to subscribe to what you're reading, or what keeps you coming back to it. It was something along those lines. And across the board, it was information I can't get anywhere else. And so, obviously it has to be valuable. Well, that's pretty subjective, because what's valuable to me is not valuable to John. Because we have different interests and we have different things that we care about. And so, but the information I can't get anywhere else was such an interesting takeaway from that survey that's something, Chris, you took very seriously. And that's where a lot of that, here's the exclusive data in the newsletter that you can only get here. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell people that this is how you can subscribe to our newsletter, because we're talking about marketing the newsletter. Make it easy. If you don't have a URL like this for your own website, create one that redirects to wherever your newsletter lives so that you can promote it super duper easily. And you can even say, you can read it out loud. You can tell people what it is, but it's not this mangled trustinsights.ai/resources/ things we write /newsletters / subscribe here. Like, no one's going to remember that. It has to be short, snappy, and easy to remember.
Exactly. The bench test for anything like that is open up your smartphone on the smart assistant of your choice and say, hey, robot, go visit trustinsights.ai/newsletter on the web, And if it can get it right on the first go, you're in good shape. If it gets confused, or like to your point, Katie, it takes you 14 seconds to say the whole thing out loud, it's probably a no-go. But the Smart Assistant is the easiest way to validate that you've made something that's easy to share. So we've covered the 3 layers of performance management for email marketing: the performance itself, its traffic driving ability, and its converting ability. How to attract more subscribers by looking at the UI of your subscription page, the list, the offer, the creative, and the marketing of the email as a product, and investing in it like a company product. And how to make your email work harder by cross-promoting and by directing the attention that you've earned. So thanks to everyone who has participated. Lots of questions in this session. Any final parting thoughts, Katie and John?
So John, what are you going to go do different with the Marketing Over Coffee newsletter?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a lot of work to be done with that. A/B testing at the top of things. But I do have to give the plug. If you're watching on YouTube, click like, click subscribe, ring the bell so we can catch up with you later.
All right, folks, we'll talk to you all next week. Take care. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.